This guy is a blur on tape. He zigs and zags.
He's a complete freak of nature, maybe one of the biggest freaks that we've seen. Hello and welcome into the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. I'm National Recruiting Analyst Cooper Petagna alongside 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting Andrew Ivins. We got a great show for you today. Year 2 breakout candidates in college football. That is the 2023 cycle. Andrew and I will dive in. We'll take 4 players apiece that could break out this upcoming season. So we'll talk about that. We'll also get into your viewer questions as well. We got a Matt Zenitz article that we'll break down too about some of the most unheralded recruits in the country, if you want to call them that. Put them in quotation marks. But Drew, July 24th today, I was like, why is that date significant? We are less than 30 days away from the start of the college football season. And guess what? We got Florida State, Georgia Tech, and Dublin. I haven't thought much about that game. That is like a sneaky good game to start this season. Any chance in your mind Georgia Tech pulls the upset and then all of a sudden like the dominoes start week 0 in college football?
Well, I don't even know what the spread is for that game, but you would have to think, given what Florida State lost to the NFL, I mean, hey, the door's open, Haynes King, Georgia Tech. I think it's a tricky kind of travel going across the country. And I was actually around some Florida State coaches back in February, and they were talking about that. What's kind of the game plan? How are you going to get out there? So, yeah, I mean, certainly a reason to tune in for week 0. We're getting closer and closer.
Brent Key, ACC Media Days happening right now, along with Big Ten Media Days there in Indianapolis. Our crew, CBS, doing a great job covering that. Bud Elliott, Josh Pate, Emily Proud. Make sure to get locked into that on CBS HQ. But Drew, an article came out over the last 2 days, one this morning, one yesterday, highlighting 60 players that Matt Zenitz did an article, a national college football reporter here at 24/7 Sports, highlighting 60 players that college football personnel staffers have really kind of highlighted based on their feedback. Now, the catch here is you can't highlight anybody from your current recruiting class. So these are all kind of a peer review of maybe some of the top players in the country outside of that top 247, outside of that 4-star range. You and I were talking about it along with the rest of the scouting team. Any just clear takeaways from this exercise that Zenitz did that, I think for us is a pretty fun one?
Yeah, so he did 30 names on offense, right? And I think you need to describe it a little bit better. These are guys that aren't 4-star prospects, so we call them unheralded recruits in the 2025 cycle, right? These are the rising seniors. Most of them are committed. They're going to play their senior season, sign in December, and then they'll be on a college campus in January, more than likely. So he did 30 offensive players on Tuesday, 30 defensive players here on Wednesday morning, and I would definitely check it out. I mean, it's a fun read on 247sports.com. My number one takeaway, Cooper, a lot of these guys have been considered for spots inside the top 247. I mean, you read up and down those lists. I think 7 of the guys on offense have been on our discussion board, have been considered at some point, and the same thing, 7 on defense. I'll say this, out of the 60 players as well, right? So again, 30 and 30 equals 60. 49 of them hold a 3-star grade of an 87 or higher for us. We say it all the time. Hey, 3 stars are players too. If we say you're an 87, 88, 89, we actually think there is a chance you're going to make an NFL training camp. We think there's a chance that you could get drafted. I think the disclaimer in this entire exercise should be, hey, we only got 300 spots every cycle to use a 4-star or a 5-star on those prospects, right? We got the top 247, and then we go 60, 80 deep when those 4-star 90s outside. So easy to sit around and be like, hey, I think this guy's got a chance, but we're taking calculated shots here. So that's something that jumped out to me. Also, Coop, I mean, is it really going out on a limb to put some Clemson commits on there, some Georgia commits on there, some Alabama commits on there? I mean, that seemed like pretty low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, you mentioned 49 out of the 60 either rated somewhere between that 89 to 87 rating range, which for us, it's the equivalent of a priority free agent. 89 kind of being a tier 1, 88 being a tier 2, 87 being a tier 3. The good thing for us, if you're seeing the majority of these guys, 49 out of the 60 fall in that range, that's a good thing for us to kind of breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief. Obviously, it's good to get that feedback from collegiate personnel staffers, guys that they like. But, Drew, there's some quotes in there, some eye raisers as well. I want to bring up this one. Beckham Kritza, who's committed to Penn State. We've talked a lot about Penn State quarterback recruiting, what that kind of looks like. Where does Matt Zollers fit in from the state of Pennsylvania? He ends up committing to Missouri. Beckham Kritza, how about this? Best raw arm talent I've seen coming out of high school. What do you think of that one?
Double take. That was screenshotted and sent off to some people. Hey, look, I mean, Beckham Kritza, he's 6'5". He's got a basketball background. I call him a nomad. He's been in California. He's been in Colorado, Miami Central, back to Colorado. Now he's back at Miami Central, and it looks like he's going to be quarterback one for the Rockets. I see it. I don't know if he's the best in the country when it comes to this raw arm talent. Whoever that anonymous college player personnel is, I got some film for you, right? Let's get Kamario Taylor out there. How about all those freaks at the Elite 11? I just thought that was an interesting comment. But I'm excited to see Beckham Kritza this upcoming season, what he can do as a senior. I think he is someone, we've said it in the past, the Penn State quarterback commit. He needs to play football. He needs to get game reps. And it sounds like, based on what I know coming out of the 305, he should be the guy. And Miami Central is going to play a huge time schedule. Coop, I think I was telling you, Miami Central, Miami Northwestern, little scuffle back at the 2-2 Atwell 7-on-7 a few weeks ago. That rivalry is ramped back up. I'm fired up to see it.
Keyword in this article, anonymous, right, for these guys working on the player personnel side. But Matt Zenitz put out a great article. Like I said, a couple notable guys. Amir Smith committed to Maryland. You got Logan Brooking, Clemson, Hollis Davidson, Auburn, like Drew mentioned, a handful of notable guys there in that 3-star range. Make sure to check out all of Matt Zenitz's work on 247sports.com, where you can also find wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings, and transfer portal updates as well. Drew, now it's time for us to get into what we promised at the top of the show, and that is highlighting some second-year players that we think can be breakout candidates. This is a fun exercise because you really kind of comb through the top 100, the top 247, maybe some guys outside of the top 247 that you really kind of starred throughout the process 2 years ago as guys that could make early impacts. I don't know about you. I like going back through and kind of seeing, all right, what these guys do as freshmen, what does that year two jump look like? And a guy for me, Drew, to start this conversation off that I have high hopes for going into year two. How about PJ Adebawore from Oklahoma, a guy that we had ranked as a 5-star, the number 9 player in the country, one of the top edges in the country as well. His brother drafted by the Indianapolis Colts out of Northwestern just a few short years ago. You talk about elite traits, freak, 6'4", 250 pounds, played 5 technique, playing an even front for Brent Venables, a sack and a half, Drew, had over 180 snaps played as a true freshman. So you look at some of the things that he put on tape as a freshman. Obviously, there is a way to go from the field, the instincts, the play speed, acclimating to the level of competition in the SEC and the Big 12 last year. But Drew, in terms of everything you want to see, and this guy making taking the next step as one of the premier pass rushers in the country, and this is a position where Oklahoma is actually in a pretty good spot with what they have there. I just think PJ Adebawore is going to be very, very difficult for Brent Venables to keep off the field. And if you're looking for one of those guys to just get better and better year over year, I think he's going to take a step this year, and then the year after that, you're going to see one of those guys that I think NFL scouts are going to be drooling over.
Hey, Coop, there's a third Adebawore brother in the 2025 cycle just committed to UPenn, so the Ivy League getting one of these freaks. I think the most encouraging thing about PJ that he is the fact that he played 184 snaps. We thought he was going to be a longer burn. Then we got him that Under Armour All-American game, and he was a little bit ahead of the curve, but it was still like, okay, I don't know if it's a for sure thing. Year one, he's going to be part of the rotation. I think the goal for him, what you should envision here in 2024, is a sub-package situational rusher. You can get exotic on defense. We know Brent Venables likes to do that. Third and long, bring PJ in, let him kind of push some pockets. So that's a great one to highlight there. T-box is mine now. How are we doing this? We going back and forth?
Yeah,
is that kind of the
set it up? Take the T-box, and this is I think we use that word polarizing, intriguing way too often. But if there was one guy that I think you go back outside of Brandon Ennis, maybe 2 years ago in that 2023 cycle, if there was one guy that I think the scouting group was kind of split on, do we put him in the top 32? Where does he kind of fit? I think it would be this dude. So the T-box is yours, Drew.
Yeah, Hakeem Williams, former five-star, and I think you're going to sense a theme with all these individuals we list. A lot of them were on my freaks list a few years ago. We saw some splashes of him last season, right? Played 94 snaps in 8 games, 5 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. You just saw the TD on the screen, that 44-yard catch and run versus Syracuse. Got a little dinged up. Coop, Florida State, they lose Keon Coleman. They lose Johnny Wilson. They did add some guys via the transfer portal, but if you read the excellent work that comes out of Knowles 247, they're waiting for a wide receiver to step up. I think Hakeem Williams can be that dude. And let's go back to Hakeem Williams' recruitment. He's at Stranahan High School, was a basketball-focused athlete, makes the transition over to football, didn't catch a ton of passes as a senior. He actually kind of set it down. So when he arrived in Tallahassee, the word coming out, you talk to some of the individuals inside that building, is they knew they were going to have to break him down and essentially teach him everything. He wasn't coming from this elite high school program. He was a big fish in a small pond. And I think it took Hakeem Williams some time to find his footing. And there's a quote out there from Jordan Travis midway through October. Jordan Travis, when Hakeem first got here, he couldn't even go through conditioning. And that's not really surprising to me, knowing Hakeem Williams. Now, he's a freak athlete. Saw him play high school basketball. He runs down the court, punches it. The guys at UC report, I think he had one of the fastest max speed times in the class of 2023. So I'm holding out hope, or I wouldn't be surprised if we look up, hey, maybe it's week 0 against Georgia Tech, and Hakeem Williams is taken over as that big perimeter target, that the vacancy with no longer Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson there. He's battling with Kentron Portier for that 9 wide receiver job. I think that's what they call it at FSU. So he's one I'm tracking. The other thing that's encouraging, you dig into the PFF, Hakeem Williams was really good at blocking. In games where he actually played, more than 10 snaps, his blocking grade in the 70s. Kind of rare to see for a freshman. So I think, to me, it would make a lot of sense for him to get some targets. I think he just needs confidence, and we'll see if he can do it here in 2024.
I think we knew it was going to be a longer burn with Hakeem Williams, and then obviously you mentioned guys like Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, now off to the NFL and going to play on Sundays. Big void there in Tallahassee in terms of looking for a receiver to step up. Hakeem Williams, we saw that game against Syracuse, albeit a very limited sample size, gets dinged up a little bit later in the season, as you mentioned as well. I think continuity is important. I think a full offseason, that quote that you mentioned from Jordan Travis, looking like a guy that is still very much so acclimating to the collegiate game, now has a full offseason under his belt, strength conditioning program, healthy nutrition as well. Drew, all those things are really, really important, especially for a guy looking to make that leap going into his second year. So a lot of expectations for Hakeem Williams in Tallahassee. Know they're excited about him. How about this one, Drew? Already a transfer and a former five-star. How about Lance Hurd, who started his career at LSU, and a guy that played a good bit of ball, considering the fact that LSU has guys like Will Campbell and Emory Jones that are going to be playing on Sundays here relatively soon. Lance Hurd, 195 snaps, appeared in 12 games for the Tigers last year, started against Army, didn't give up a sack. Drew, this was a guy in spot reps that looked very comfortable at the right tackle position. Obviously, Emory Jones missed some time there last year. We had the conversation, is he going to be a left tackle? Is he going to be a right tackle? LSU has one of the best offensive lines in the country that forces Lance Hurd's hand. He jumps in the transfer portal. Tennessee has a huge need at the left tackle spot, opposite of John Campbell. And now you look at Lance Hurd, man, just 6'6", over 315 pounds. He can do so much, carries his weight exceptionally well, a little bit stiff, but can get to the second level. Once he gets those big old paws on you, it's over. So I love the fit there in Knoxville for Lance Hurd. Drew, very quickly, I think Lance Hurd is going to make a reputation for himself as one of the best offensive tackles, not only in the SEC, but in the country. I think we'll see that over the span of the next 2 years. And you look at that room, Will Campbell, Emory Jones, Lance Hurd now in Tennessee. Those are 3 guys. I know it's early right now, but those are 3 guys that could potentially go on day 1 of the NFL draft. So Lance Hurd obviously making his move to Knoxville, staying within the SEC, because he was forced out. I don't know where you're going to find playing time. He's really not a natural fit at guard either. But you're looking, at my opinion, at one of the premier tackles in the SEC in a short time here.
Kind of feels like the NFL in terms of a very promising offensive tackle hitting free agency. This isn't going to happen all that often, and Tennessee is the one that pounces on the opportunity. Coop, I was playing with the Vols on EA Sports over the weekend. I think Nico needs Lance Hurd to be that corner protector for him, because I think he's going to be one of the keys to that offense really going. And Tennessee also wants to run the football, but they need him. And the early feedback, I think there was some quotes coming out of the SEC media days. Lance Hurd is the real deal.
All right, I'm excited about this one. We're going to stay at the offensive line, and another guy that we had highly ranked coming out of high school inside the top 50, the number 8 offensive tackle in the country, Charles Jagasaw. Super interesting kid, especially given his background, was a two-way player, had the wrestling background that we liked a lot. Saw only 66 snaps last season across 2 games, but he started in the Sun Bowl, which gives you some exposure to Charles Jagasaw and what he's capable of. Drew, he kind of falls in that raw developmental upside category. Watching him start at left tackle in talking with you, he's obviously further advanced in the run game than he is in terms of pass pro. I think he's got a long way to go there. He reminds me so much of Andrews Pete, who's played 7 seasons in the NFL and a former All-American offensive lineman with the Stanford Cardinal, but a guy that eventually a guy that played a lot of tackle and eventually moved inside to guard. Jagasaw, to me, I think at some point, not saying that he's not going to stick at left tackle for Notre Dame, but just in terms of what we've seen so far in a very limited sample size, I wouldn't be shocked at some point, whether in his collegiate career or his career on Sundays, if he ends up moving inside.
Yeah, Coop, I would agree with that. I mean, you kind of rattled it off here with Charles Jagasaw. I threw him on the list because out of all the year 2 players in the country, I think he's one where the team's success kind of hinges the most on his ability to be ready to go here in 2024. Jagasaw started, like you said, in that bowl game as Joe Alt, the first-round pick. He opted out. You put on the tape from that performance. I think he was thinking too much with his head. The pass sets weren't really encouraging. It seemed kind of timid, catching a little bit. Not what you wanted to see, but he's had an entire spring, right? He's going to get a preseason camp here, and Notre Dame needs him. That left tackle position for the Irish over the years, it's really kind of been their strength. I mentioned Joe Alt, but the guys before him, Liam Eichenberg, he's in the NFL. Ronnie Stanley, he's in the NFL. And Mike McGlinchey, he's in the NFL. I mean, those have really been kind of the starters over the past decade, and all of them started for multiple games. So they need Charles Jagasaw to be the guy. We'll see if it happens, but he's got an early season test at Texas A&M week 1. Nick Scorton comes over from Purdue. There's a ton of talent up front for the Aggies. And then week 5, Louisville comes to South Bend. They got Ashton Gillette, one of the top sack artists in the ACC. I agree with your notion, probably a better run blocker than he is a pass blocker at this stage, but the Irish really need Jagasaw. We like the multi-sport profile coming up out of high school. He was a decorated wrestler. He's a guy that needs to step up, and certainly someone I'm going to be watching week 1, like I said, when they travel to College Station.
Maybe not as polished as some of the tackles coming out in 2023, and a big reason why, Drew. I mean, we kind of went back and forth. Is this guy going to be a 5-star? Is he going to be a top 32 prospect? Ends up kind of being right outside of that, a fringe 5-star. And the biggest thing for him, Drew, we've talked about it, but his ability to anchor, and you talked about some of those pass rushers that he's going to see early in the season. That is the matchup right now. I mean, a month and a half out before they play Texas A&M in College Station that I think everybody's going to be looking at. Nick Scourton, one of the best pass rushers in the country. Charles Jagasaw is certainly going to have his hands full. And, Drew, you mentioned it. If there's one position, that premier left tackle spot to protect Riley Leonard, that's going to be the spot that a lot of people are looking at. All right, Drew, I'm finally going to get involved with the skill position. How about Jeremiah Love from Notre Dame as well, since we're on the topic? And this is a guy you turn on the tape. It is so easy to love this kid. Competed all 13 games last season. He started in the Sun Bowl against Oregon State, finished second on the team with 385 rushing yards, averaged 5.4 yards per carry. So we have seen a good bit of Jeremiah Love and the production that he can bring to the table for the Fighting Irish. You mentioned that backfield, Jadarian Price, Audric Estime now off to the NFL. That was a by committee group. I think you're going to see more Jeremiah Love, not only out of the backfield, but I love his ability as a receiver as well. 147 snaps last season, Drew. I think it's safe to say that he made the most of those. You turn on the tape here, there are some other candidates that I really kind of had written down that I was more in favor with. You turn on the tape of Love, and it was like, I had to talk about this guy. We got to get ahead of this one. So in terms of his reps, in terms of his knowledge of the game, taking that next step from his freshman to a sophomore season, this is a dude that I expect to burst onto the scene as a sophomore. We've talked about Notre Dame needing more dynamic playmakers in space on offense. Where's that going to come from? Is that going to come from the receiver position, or is it going to come from a guy like Jeremiah Love? I'm a huge fan of this kid. Look for Notre Dame and Mike Denbrock to find a way to just get him the ball and find a way to get him in space, Drew. I'm a huge, huge fan. Jeremiah Love, you could say I love Jeremiah Love. Really, really excited to see him.
I put that on a T-shirt. Hey, I'm glad you brought up Jeremiah Love, and I got a running back as one of my four we're going to get to here in a little bit. Coop, we always talk about that position. It's so easy for these guys to make an impact early, and some of the freshmen that did it in 2023, which that emerged as workhorses for their teams, they're more of that three-star flavor. Now, we've got some exposure to the blue-chip running backs, but I feel like no one really kind of was the breakthrough guy. And when I look back at our running back rankings, I think all these guys could have monster seasons. C.J. Baxter at Texas, Reuben Owens at Texas A&M, Justice Haynes at Alabama. You mentioned Jeremiah Love at Notre Dame. How about Mark Fletcher at Miami, Richard Young, another guy at Alabama, like Caleb Jackson. We're going to get to him here in a little bit. But that position, the premier guys that we had ranked high, most of them, it was just a handful of touches, right around that 500-yard mark. We saw what they could be, but I think here in 2024 is when, those front-running running backs really leave an impact.
So Drew mentioned handful of running backs still waiting to kind of emerge from that 2023 cycle. We'll touch on Caleb Jackson and LSU here in a second. But Drew, you got another guy, mid-skill player. I kind of smile here because I remember how much you loved this guy during the process. Another one-and-done guy. 1 year at South Carolina, now with the Florida Gators, stays in conference. Talk to me about Grayson Pup Howard, the expectations he has in year 2 in Gainesville.
Well, you love Jeremiah Love. I love Grayson Howard, and I have since he was a junior in high school. This guy is wired the right way. Appears in 11 games as a freshman with the Gamecocks, 223 snaps, plus 156 snaps on special teams, 19 tackles and a forced fumble. Never started a game, but he is someone that was with the program for a while. When he hit the transfer portal, I thought it was surprising, but Florida locked him up right away. Billy Napier, who was speaking at a donor/booster event back in May in the Jacksonville area, so Grayson Howard's hometown, he called Pup an alpha, and he said he'll be a major factor for the Gators moving forward. I agree. I mean, UF returns veterans Shamar James, Derek Wingo, both of them kind of limited in the spring. But that linebacker room, not a lot of capable bodies. I think Grayson Howard, by the season's end, he is someone that everyone in the SEC is going to be familiar with. I think he's a guy that's going to stuff this the stat sheet, and I think he can emerge as kind of a voice of a sneaky good defense. I continue to look at that two deep for Florida, what they have on the defensive side of the ball. I really like it, and Grayson Howard is one of my favorite pieces.
Tough loss for South Carolina. I mean, you lose Grayson Howard, you lose Stone Blanton as well to Mississippi State. A lot of these guys transferring within conference. We talked about Lance Hurd going from LSU to Tennessee, so big expectations for Grayson Howard. They need him immediately to step in and fill that void. Guys, just a reminder, you are locked in to the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. You can find myself and Andrew Ivins every Tuesday and Wednesday at noon Eastern Time on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. If you have a question, make sure to submit those in the chat. And just remember, it's subscriber only. So if you have a question, you have not yet subscribed to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, now's the time to do that. Also, if you can, please throw a like on there as well. Smash that like button for us. That helps a lot. Drew, let's continue with this exercise. We each have, I think 2 players each, or 1 player and an honorable mention. I'm going to stick with the skill position since I'm riding the hot hand here. How about Malachi Coleman? And a guy that we talked a lot about, believe he was on your freaks list not too long ago. A guy is a freshman, Drew. He had over 330 snaps, but only had 8 receptions, 139 receiving yards. You have to remember, one of the worst passing offenses in all of the country last year in Nebraska. That's why there's a lot of expectation for Dylan Raiola to step into that spot, but there's also not a ton of competition preventing him from seeing the field early. And Drew, when I think about Malachi Coleman, I think about that verticality. I think about his ability to stretch the field. This is a guy that ran 10.5, 10.6 coming out of high school in the state of Nebraska. That one touchdown there you see against Northwestern. That's what he can do. Also forced a couple PIs, a couple holding penalties as well. You have to respect that combination of size and speed, 6'4", 190 pounds. Drew, a guy that we had tucked inside that day 2 range. I love this kid. I love what he can be. I think I'd be here regardless of what the quarterback situation looked like. I also think that Dylan Raiola is one of the best pure deep ball throwers that we've seen coming out of high school in a very long time. And I think the combination of these two and the on-field fit go hand in hand together. So you see Marcus Satterfield, Dylan Raiola, young quarterback. That's what we're expecting it to be. But Malachi Coleman might be one of the very few players on this team that's going to benefit the most from having some competency at the quarterback position, especially in the deep third. I'm really excited about what these two can do.
Solid selection here, Cooper. I feel like we saw, you mentioned 335 snaps, but only those 8 catches. I mean, Nebraska's passing attack has to get better. I think we're talking about guys entering year 2, but if we're going to toss a true freshman out there, how about Ja'Cory Barney, who is also went through spring practices there in Lincoln? I think he's someone to keep an eye on as a potential breakout, youngster there. And him and Malachi Coleman, Dylan Raiola is going to have options. And again, you would think that passing attack is going to get better.
All right, Drew. It's funny. I continue to go back to your list, and I continue to laugh because I just remember you just pounding the table, not only for Grayson Puppower, but another dude right here battling some injuries, but a guy that you're a firm believer in. Talk to me about Ethan Davis from Tennessee.
Back to Rocky Top here, right? You talked about Lance Hurd. How about Ethan Davis, our number 7 tight end in the class of 2023? This is a guy that has dealt with some injuries, was banged up all as a freshman during spring practices, injured his collarbone, so he was limited. We didn't get to see him in the spring game. But Tennessee, there's a void there. They lose a pair of veteran tight ends that combined to catch 38 passes for 474 yards and 9 touchdowns. They bring in some transfers. Holden Stays from Notre Dame. They also got a kid from Alabama. Those guys have only started 9 career games, and they haven't been featured a ton in the passing attack. Ethan Davis, that was kind of his bread and butter coming out of high school there in Georgia. He's got a basketball background, actually had some hoop offers at one point. I love his body control. I love what he was able to do after the catch. I think Tennessee's going to play a lot of tight ends. I think you're going to see some multiple tight end sets. I think it's going to be a rotation. All 3 of those guys I mentioned are going to be on the field. But just kind of reading between the tea leaves, it seems like the coaches have their fingers crossed that Ethan Davis is going to be that dude. He's going to be the X factor for the offense. He's going to be a guy that you can leak out from the line of scrimmage, and he can turn, a 5-yard gain into a 15-yard game. So Ethan Davis is on here for me. If he can stay healthy, I think that is the biggest question mark. He's got that injury tag on him, but if he can stay healthy, then I think he is someone that can make plays in the SEC, and I think he's going to surprise a lot of people.
Didn't see a lot of snaps as a true freshman. Drew, only 28 snaps, 2 catches, both coming against UConn. But what you could see out of that very limited sample size is Josh Heupel's plan for how they're going to utilize this guy. And this is a guy that they utilized out of the backfield a lot. They slipped him. You kind of saw that, I think, against UConn. They slip him out of the backfield. He can attach, detach. Drew, you talked about maybe one of the more exciting prospects. Kind of fits that same category of a guy that you can do a lot of different things with. Brock Bowers, I don't know if you want to call him that, but just in terms of the utility, right? We've seen that Kenyon Sadiq, Oregon, Oscar Delp. I expect the same thing. I mean, these are guys that you can get creative with out of the backfield in a really exciting pass-catching skill set with Ethan Davis. So looking forward to seeing him. Drew, a couple other guys from the SEC as we round this out, the same school with the Bayou Bengals. But let's talk a little bit about DJ Chester. Had him really kind of on my honorable mention list. This is a guy that I like a lot. I mean, we had him as the number 1 interior offensive lineman in the country, and for good reason. Saw limited snaps, redshirted, played in 4 games last season for LSU, had to replace Charles Turner against Missouri, which was a barn burner. Big kid, man, over 6'6", over 300 pounds. You talk about this LSU offensive line. We talked about it a lot. They got the bookends with Campbell and Jones. You got guys like Dellinger and Frazier that have played a lot of ball. Now insert DJ Chester. Drew, just in terms of a position blocker with a really mature game, I still think he needs to work on his body from year 1 to year 2. Thought he was going to be a little bit quicker, both not only with the body quickness, but the foot quickness as well. There's still a lot to like. And like I said, he's got a mature game. I think he's going to get better year over year. But when DJ Chester came out, he played tackle. I think you and I always got really excited about, all right, this guy can play right tackle, could be a swing if you needed him, can move inside to guard. He's got multi-positional flex across the offensive line. He could probably play 4 positions, plugs in at center. That's where they need him. I think this is the best center prospect in Baton Rouge since Lloyd Cushenberry. So I think this is a guy that they're going to be excited about. I think this is one of the best offensive lines in the country. This is the one new face that they need to step in and give them some consistency. I think they got a chance to get better with this kid, quite honestly.
What about his teammate, Caleb Jackson, the running back? Jaden Daniels is obviously no longer there in Baton Rouge. You wonder, okay, who's going to fuel this offense? You keep gushing about this offensive line, Cooper, and for good reason. Brad Davis does an excellent job. But you want a running back to circle, you want a running back to take in your college football fantasy leagues, I think it's Caleb Jackson. 70 snaps in 13 games this past year. You know, they didn't need him much. He doubled here and there as a kick returner, 31 carries for 165 yards, 4 touchdowns. I think he's going to he might have that after the first half of the season opener. I mean, another guy that was on the freaks list for me, go back to his junior season of high school, Cooper. Through the first 3 games of his season, he had averaged 22.4 yards per carry with 12 touchdowns. I think this is a guy to know in the SEC. You're looking for kind of a sleeper to make a splash and maybe potentially push for all SEC honors. It's Caleb Jackson for me. And I know you've been a fan because there was various points at last season where you said Caleb Jackson is going to be a dude.
Yeah, 225 pounds. I think a lot of people in Baton Rouge didn't really know what they had there. LSU came around late. Frank Wilson deciding to give the nod to Caleb Jackson. Drew, all you got to do, go back to that Mississippi State game last season that LSU had. Caleb Jackson, he's got some flashes of like Leonard Fournette. I don't want to get crazy with all these comparisons. He is a super powerful runner. You love that contact balance, his ability to fall forward. That's kind of what he brings LSU. LSU going to have to rely a lot more on the run without the legs of Jaden Daniels this year. Talked about DJ Chester. We talked about Caleb Jackson. No shortage of weapons there in BR. 2 guys we didn't talk about, Drew, that you had mentioned, I think, in the production call before we jumped on this show. 2 guys that might be forgotten a little bit. About Carnell Tate, how about Brandon Ennis? Carnell Tate, we had finished as a 5-star out of IMG Academy. The other one, Brandon Ennis, was kind of knocking on the doorstep there. You bring in Jeremiah Smith. Noah Rogers goes to NC State. This is one of the most loaded receiver rooms in the country year after year. Not to mention former 5-star Emeka Egbuka also drawing praise as a potential first-round draft choice as well. No shortage of options. I kind of wonder who's going to be the odd man out here, Drew, heading into this season. It's a great problem to have if you're Ryan Day and Brian Hartline. But one of these guys is going to be receiver number 4. I don't think that's going to be Jeremiah Smith.
Well, Coop, I brought them up and kind of had them written down because it feels like they have been forgotten with all that Jeremiah Smith hype. And I had a ton of exposure to Brandon Ennis. I had a ton of exposure to Carnell Tate. We saw Carnell Tate for spells there in 2023. Brandon Ennis actually played in 5 games. You know, he avoided a red shirt. To me, just knowing how he is wired, having seen him compete time and time again on the camp circuit and then again in pads there at American Heritage High School, I think this is a kid where he sees all the noise around Jeremiah Smith, and that is only going to fuel him. And you said it, if you're Ryan Day, that's the problem you want to have because competition is going to make everyone better. So I just was thinking about it. Hey, you know, what if we look up 2-3 weeks into the season and it's Brandon Ennis who has the catches and it's not Jeremiah Smith? I think some people would think that's a little bit crazy given the hype train around Jeremiah Smith, and for good reason. I continue to hear nothing but glowing reviews coming out of Columbus. I think Ohio State's a little stunned by how good he has been. Let's not forget about Mr. Ennis. That's a guy everyone in the country wanted as well. A guy that was playing varsity football since he was in 8th grade and made an impact time and time again in South Florida against elite defensive backs. I just wouldn't rule or write him off just yet, Brandon Ennis.
All right, let's round this thing out. Drew, you had one more guy that you wanted to mention here, former top 247 defensive lineman, one of the most heralded recruits in the country just a few short years ago. Talk to me about Jordan Hall in Georgia, because they got some big shoes to fill there as well.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Hall is who I was going to lead my list off with, because Georgia, for all the talent they have on defense, I still think they're kind of missing that true difference maker right there in the middle that can take over games. They're good. They just don't have that guy that can unlock some things. And to me, Jordan Hall is the guy I had circled as potentially being that dude in the middle. And then as I go to start assembling these notes, find out he's going to miss the start of fall camp with a leg injury. I think that is a notable kind of loss for the Bulldogs. Unclear on what the injury is. It sounds like they're hoping he'll be back by the start of the season, but he had some flashes there, most notably against Tennessee in 2023. So there's an early injury before camp even really starts where I think it could affect a team that's going to be fighting, obviously, for a spot in the college football playoff.
No shortage of options here. I mean, we could have gone a lot of different ways. I think about guys like Kelby Collins. What about Mateo Yu going into year 2 at Oregon? Showed some flashes in year 1. You go down the list. Drew Noah Rogers, we didn't talk about, obviously transferred from Ohio State, now at NC State. Jonte Cook as well. Jalen Hale could be one of those guys that steps up for Alabama. You go down the list, there's no shortage of second-year guys that could impress in year 2 and become household names. Is there anybody here that you're looking at, former 5-star, former guy inside the top 100, that you're like, I know it's early, but it kind of feels a little bit like a make-or-break year already?
Keon Keeley, I think at Alabama, number 3 player, took a red shirt. We always thought, I personally did, I thought he was better suited for an even front than an odd front, and he found himself in a 3-4 last season. I think he is one where the pressure is on. And back in the spring, I was reading the practice reports coming out of the guys, that do Bama 247. I wanted to know where Keon Keeley was. So he's one. I had this question written down for you, Cooper. Is there a year 2 quarterback that you don't think we're talking about enough? And what makes this a little bit different is some of these guys started bowl games. Nico started a bowl game. Dante Moore started. Jackson Arnold started a bowl game. Avery Johnson started a bowl game. Is there any quarterbacks out there where you're like, okay, we're not talking about him enough? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here. But it was interesting as I scrolled through the rankings and was looking for, a guy that might have been ranked high that we're gonna know about come the end of October.
He's been talked about plenty. How about Lenora Sellers? We had as a 3-star guy at South Carolina. He's going to start in year 2. He's got to fill the shoes of Spencer Radler there, who had a productive 2 years there in Columbia. I think another guy that you can look at, Drew, is Sam Levitt, who transferred from Michigan State to Arizona State as well. Kenny Dillingham, obviously really excited about him, leads to the transfer of Jaden Rashada. You can go down the list and kind of start to kind of read between the tea leaves on a couple of these guys. But what happens to guys like Christopher Vizina backing up Cade Klubnik for another year? What happens to guys like Lincoln Kineholz? Now all of a sudden Julian Sane, you throw him into the mix. Aiden Childs at Michigan State, a lot of expectations going into year 1, even though that roster is turning over. Malachi Nelson now at Boise State. Can he get back to the player that we were so highly thought of just a few short years ago before entering his senior season there in California? So, Drew, I think there are a handful of guys that you look at. Rashada, Dante Moore, these guys kind of taking an inverted path to now they're getting their redshirt year as a sophomore as opposed to the freshman traditional way of kind of going throughout that process. So I don't want to say I think more so the portal, especially for quarterback recruiting, has kind of skewed things a little bit. It's either early access. All right, now I got to go find another spot where I can really kind of sit, get reps, be in a good system where I can find some continuity. It's fascinating to see guys like Dante Moore, Jaden Rashada, and then on the flip side of that, you got a guy like Malachi Nelson who's one and done, loses out to Miller Moss, really doesn't have any interest in kind of seeing that quarterback battle play out, wants to find a new home where he can play early, goes to Boise State. Now he's at the Group of 5 level. It's kind of the conversation that you and I have had about Antoine Hill. So I think there are a lot of different quarterback dynamics taking place here, and I think it's a great question. I mean, we're still waiting on guys like Austin Mack, who's a reclassification as well. What happens post Jalen Milroe? So you can go down the list. You can find a lot of different examples of guys in a lot of different situations. It's going to be certainly interesting to watch over the next couple of years.
I mean, I don't know, Cooper. I read a lot. I listen a lot, kind of season previews and stuff. And just when I go to the class of 2023, aside from the dudes at the top of the board, it's like, okay, is there a sophomore or a redshirt freshman quarterback out there that is legitimately in a quarterback battle or is going to push for playing time? I can't really find any, and I can't find anywhere it makes sense. And it's amazing how many of these guys have already changed schools. Some of the names that I think I'm holding out hope for, like Brock Glenn at Florida State. We got a little bit of him last year. He could have certainly left there in Tallahassee. He stays. What about J.J. Cole at Iowa State? Now he's got another year under his belt. They got Rocco Beck there, but that was a 4-star prospect, a kid we saw in the Under Armour All-America game. He's another one that I kind of have written down. Jackson Smolik at Penn State. Just got a chance to see him when I was there for the Elite 11 Regional. Who knows what happens with Drew Aller, but I think if Drew were to struggle, there might be some calls for Jackson at some point down the line. So I don't know. It was just kind of fascinating. A lot of these guys have changed schools, and I don't know who in that 3-star range is going to break through and start games here in 2024.
Yeah, what happens to guys like Kenny Minchie? What happens to guys like Marcel Reed? I mean, they seem to be in situations where, Texas A&M, they're bringing in Hassan Longstreet, right? He's right in between a guy like Connor Wigman as well. There's a lot of talent in that quarterback room. Maybe he's the guy next year. Kenny Minchie, squeezed in between Riley Leonard and C.J. Carr. A lot of expectations for C.J. Carr. Kenny Minchie at one point was committed to Pittsburgh, right? So we'll see what happens with those type of guys. If there were guys that aren't playing yet but have showed some promise, I think those would be two guys that you would look at. So quarterback, I wouldn't call them dominoes. Musical chair is obviously always active in 2023. And guys, before we get to your viewer questions, just one last reminder, make sure to like and subscribe, but also submit your questions as well, as we'll get to those in the next 10 to 15 minutes. And Drew, let's get to them right now. Andrew asks, he says, what position group is the most vital to hit on for high school players, meaning that position is most difficult to supplement from the portal and take time to develop? I got two that have gone straight to the dome here. So if you want me to lead off on this, I mean, point of attack, right? I mean, we talk about it all the time. I think these guys are very difficult to find. You saw Dominic Williams from TCU jump in the transfer portal. You saw the type of number reported around a guy like Dominic Williams. Oklahoma gets it done. LSU was in there. Drew, we talked about it, ironically enough, with Oklahoma, Floyd Boucard, the 3-star from Florida, Miami Central, by way of Canada. It's better to get those guys on the front end, especially where the game is moving and the financial component of this. That is so much of that market. If you're looking for a starter caliber or a winnable plus or an all-league conference player at the point of attack, good luck. And we talked about that with Tennessee landing Lance Hurd and a guy that played less than 200 snaps. You talk about need, you talk about access to playing time, and then you talk about the financial motivation of that decision as well. It kind of all added up, perfect storm. Oklahoma in the same stance. These guys are very difficult to find. And I look at programs that feel like they are 1 or 2 players away from competing for a playoff spot. And we've seen teams like OU coming off a double-digit win season make that move for an interior defensive lineman. We've seen teams like Tennessee that have a lot invested in their quarterback that feel like they need their corner protector there. You can go down the list, and if you're looking at premier players, you're looking at guys that are not going to be in the market for very long. Caleb Downs was a quick one. Damani Jackson was a quick one as well. We're talking about the best players at their position, but if you wanted to make it a position case, I think offense and defensive line, if you're looking for that guy that can move the needle, put you over the top, unless you're the 1% of 1% of college football, and then you have the bankroll to do it, good luck finding that guy. You're much better in a place to be able to do that via high school.
Yeah, I think it's pass protectors, pass rushers, and then pass defenders. I mean, you just look at what some of the markets these guys have in the transfer portal: offensive tackle, defensive end, and then the cornerbacks. It seems like everyone is looking for those. Those are the positions where I think you should volume shoot, especially. We keep talking about it, but with the roster fluidity, your ability to bring in 25 plus guys every cycle, I would roll the dice with those positions in terms of getting some developmental bodies and seeing if you can coach them up and grow them in-house. That's where I would be using my draft picks, not trying to use my free agency money there. Coop, you know what another one that I've heard from some college staffers is kind of like a sneaky hard thing to find in the transfer portal? It's like those big framed wide receivers. Now, there seems to be a ton of smaller guys that you can play on the inside that can create separation, but the big, I'm talking like 6'3", 6'4", 215-pound individuals, those are the ones that I think are hard. And the term I keep hearing is like true wide receiver one types of talents, guys that can get open on 3rd and long and are going to catch and secure the football with the defender draped all over him. To me, it's like Colby Young at Georgia, who comes over from Miami. That's like a sneaky good get potentially for them, and we'll see what happens this season. So pass protectors, pass rushers, pass defenders, and then I think true veteran wide receiver one types is another position that probably doesn't get talked about enough with that transfer portal.
Yeah, Keon Coleman goes early in the second round. You think about Adonai Mitchell as well, coming over from Georgia to Texas. Isaiah Bond coming over from Alabama to Austin as well. I mean, those guys are really, really difficult to find. But just think about the trajectory of a Florida State program without a Keon Coleman, and with Keon Coleman, what that program looks like. I mean, that's probably one or two wins, the difference there from having a true number one receiver that ends up being a top 50 draft choice as well. So offense, defensive line, as Drew said, a receiver number one, all very difficult to come by via the portal, Andrew also asked, when a recruit is right on the edge of 4-star status, what typically gets them over the ledge? Senior season tape, camp film, just curious what typically is the deciding factor.
Well, I think that's a great question. I'll take the honors here, Cooper. I mean, we've said this in the past, and I'm sure some people kind of like roll their eyes. All right, what does that mean? I feel as good about our top 247 at this stage as I ever have in the past. We just did that update, which was focused on the quarterbacks, but we were trying to move some guys into the top 247, guys we had new exposure points on, guys that we had new data on. And as we went in and we opened up the hood and because I think people always forget, if someone goes into the top 247, someone is coming out of the top 247. It's a two-way street. And it was difficult because we feel so good and so convicted. We talk about it all the time. We have this next-gen software that we're using now. There's green, red numbers, different tags, and we have write-ups from all of our analysts there. So, it gets harder and harder to move these guys out. What's going to push these individuals through into the top 247s? I mean, senior seasons, absolutely. We want guys where the arrow is pointing up. And from what we have seen now with the transfer portal, with guys potentially opting out, we're starting to be able to read into, okay, is this prospect a guy we want to bet on? Is this guy wired the right way? I think we're trying to identify that more and more than ever. So, yeah, senior seasons are important. And at the end of the day, really, we're going to give consideration to the prospects that we have the most information on. And it's so critical and key to get that last exposure at the All-Star games. I mean, think about how that changed our 2024 rankings with TJ Moore shooting up into 5-star status and whatnot. So it's a combination of things. And maybe we should have touched on this on the front end, Cooper, talking about Matt Zennett's article. Like, hey, if an 89 gets drafted, if a kid with an 88 grade, like, we're not going to get them all. Those are really, really good grades. Like I say it all the time. Those are 3 stars are players too. I mean, 89s, 88s, a lot of time those guys have been considered for a 4-star status. We just don't have unlimited 4 stars to give out. And why not? Because if we gave everyone a 4-star, then it would be, how come he's not a 5-star? So we got to cut it off somewhere.
It's a very difficult task at hand. Not only, you only have so many limited spots for guys that you can award a 4-star to, but I think of guys like Taz Williams, Talib Graham, Tristan Norman, all guys that were on the list that Zenit's put out from the feedback base from the personnel community in college. Drew, it's an information game, especially when we're trying to decide ultimately at the end of the day, hey, is this player going to get their 4-star? We're going to bet on the traits ultimately at the end of the day, and you can look at every single one of those situations. Hey, is there a limiting factor here? Is there something that doesn't add up, or maybe we don't have the conviction here? Is there a lack of multi-sport context? Is there a lack of speed context? What are the traits ultimately at the end of the day that we're willing to bet on? Or maybe the traits are there, but the production isn't there as well. It's a balance in terms of how you kind of view these prospects. And I think a great example of that is Derek Meadows. I was explaining to my brother the other day, how Derek Meadows is ranked, where he's ranked as a top 32 player in the country with the type of production or lack of production that he has. The thing is, it's a little bit of a scale. When you have a guy that's 6'6.5", that has that type of physical background and the speed of it as well, those are things that are not very easy to come by. This is a guy, and Derek Meadows, I'll use him as an example, that every team in the country would be willing to take a shot on or a bet on, just because you don't see what he has in terms of the physical goods, right? So, yes, is there a senior season that we have to evaluate? We have to go back. We got to make sure we're buttoned up 110%. But that same logic, that same philosophical logic is being applied all the way through from top to bottom, not just the top 247 players in the country or the top 300. Every time we're looking at a player, we're trying to look at the developmental upside in the player, how it pertains to the NFL, and if they can't play in the NFL, what type of value can they have for a Power 4 or Group of 5 program? So a lot more goes into it than I think a lot of people actually think. It's not just, hey, what side of the bed do we wake up on one day, and you know what, we want to see the conference affiliation or the school that he's affiliated with. That's not it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a height, weight, speed game. We're card counters. I've said that multiple times. And really, we are going to bet on the combination of production and data that gives us the best chance to be successful. So that's our process. And the last thing, Drew, before you get back to it, there are going to be a lot of players that are rated 89s, 88s, 87s. Maybe they're not rated there somewhere else that get drafted in day 3 of the NFL draft. That is still somewhat considered a win for us when you're talking about projecting 16 and 17-year-olds 4 or 5 years down the line with a multitude of variables that you can consider and a multitude of variables that you can't consider as well. The program that you think they might be going to, they could be 2-3 years removed from that by the time that they graduate school or they decide to come out for the NFL draft. So there's a lot consider when you're ranking these players, especially when you're trying to figure out, hey, is this guy a 3-star or whether he's a 4-star at the end of the day? Something that we're super, super conscious of.
I was just going to throw out one more example and we can move on. Nick Scourton, who's now at Texas A&M, right? I see him in NFL mock drafts. He was a guy that was outside the top 247 for us. He was invited to the All-American Bowl through FBU, right? So, we really didn't know a whole ton of him. He shows up, dominates all week in practice. And I remember we met as a group, right? And everyone was like, yep, get this guy in the top 247. He ends up finishing number 186 overall for us. Yeah, should we have had him higher? But he's someone where it was that last in-person exposure that pushed him into the top 247 because he was dominating in a best-on-best setting. We believed in him, even though he was headed to Purdue at the time. And now he's at Texas A&M, obviously, through the transfer portal. So, that's another example of kind of the group consensus being sold on an individual that is ending his prep career on the high note. We had measurements on him. We saw the long-term developmental upside, and he's doing it now on Saturdays, and he's probably going to do it on Sundays.
I think that one example gives us so much conviction now when it comes to ranking players that when they sign out of high school might not sign with a Power 4, but they sign with a Group of 5 program. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you see the traits in the player, Drew, I think the other day, put a high 3-star grade on a guy going to Georgia State. There's examples of this so much more now where we feel, okay, ultimately at the end of the day, let's say that player does stick. Let's say that player is Quinion Mitchell. We believe not only with where we are in today's age, but these guys are going to have exposure, not only from the NFL, but collegiate teams as well, that are not only doing advanced scouting in their own teams, but opponent scouting as well. Every time that one of these Power 4 teams faces off against a G5 opponent, it's another opportunity, not just for the school that's facing them, but the other schools that do advanced scouting as well, to see a player like Jarrett Verse. I mean, that's how he was unearthed out of Albany by Florida State, right? So I think we're going to see more of that, more of these guys transferring up. That's what we're seeing right now. You think about Vandy, everything they went through this past year, guys transferring out of there. That happens, right? All of the SEC has seen Vanderbilt. The majority of them have. And the players that they have put on that roster, guys like London Humphreys, it's very difficult to sustain because of the way that college football is now operating from that hierarchy. So in terms of how that impacts the high school rankings, ultimately at the end of the day, we expect the player to get to the level that we feel that he's capable of because of the way that the game is being played and the way that talent acquisition goes now in college football. Drew, I know that's long-winded, but it's a good look under the hood with how things are kind of going down now.
Can I add, I know there are certain programs out there where the recruiting staff goes on the field pregame. They're not watching their roster. No, they're out there scouting the other roster and body typing. And there are certain individuals assigned to certain position groups every game.
Dog-eat-dog world. That's where we are, college football 2024. Drew, that's all I got, unless you got anything to add on it. I feel like that's a good question to end on.
No, it's a great question. 2026 update coming next week. I think we got some more commitments, as always, coming this upcoming weekend. Coop, I'm ready for high school football. I'm ready for college football. I'm ready for the NFL. It's like right around the corner.
Never ends, man. I think we got the Hall of Fame game coming up. Recruiting dead period in August, which is always nice. Bounce around to a couple fall camps near us. I'm hoping to get to a couple. We got the Player Personnel Symposium here in Nashville. We're looking forward to that as well. But guys, like I always say, there is no better place to follow college football recruiting than right here at 24/7 Sports. We appreciate you guys being locked in with us as always. For Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. We'll see you next Tuesday. Have a great rest of your week.